Hello and welcome. My name is Jess, and you're listening to Legaltini, a dynamic, hopefully insightful, and somewhat entertaining podcast documenting my experience getting into law school and following my story in the years to come. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm very excited to share what I have to share with you. So grab your Legaltini and let's take a sip. Hello, welcome to Legaltini. This week we will be discussing routine and habit building, ways that we can improve our routines and work off of old habits that we have, maybe bad habits or maybe just ones that we want to tweak a little bit, or introduce new routines altogether into our lives. And I talked last week on my podcast about some things that you can do before law school, but this is also good anytime. I mean, not necessarily before law school, but even if you are trying to do this later in the semester or even in a different time of your life, that is still a perfectly great time to start a good routine and a good habit of taking care of yourself. So the book that I am going to reference this week, and it's funny, I didn't really intend for these podcasts to always be centered around books that I've read, but I feel like that's the knowledge that I'm drawing on, and I've just read some interesting stuff and I really enjoy reading, and so I think that's why I want to share that with you. But it's not really my intention to reference a book every time. I don't get any kickback from these books. I just really have enjoyed them and want to share that information with you. So the book this week that I am referencing is called The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. It's written by a gentleman named Charles Duhigg, and it's helped me a lot to understand the science behind habit. I think for me, I'm so driven by how something works and why it is the way that it is, for me to understand it and then be able to really grasp it and buy into it. So for me, this book was really helpful because it shares a lot of that information, obviously in a way that's digestible to someone who's not a neuroscientist, because I am not one of those. But it's helpful in layman's terms to be able to explain why we do the things that we do, why when you walk by a Cinnabon in the mall, you're immediately craving it and you want it. I'm salivating just thinking about a Cinnabon in a mall, and I am nowhere near that mall. So that's great. That is a scary thing that marketers somehow have understood about us. So the basic principle that the author uses to describe this is called the habit loop, and that is a cue that leads to a routine that leads to a reward. So the way that he explained it, or the way he explained the science behind it, is he gave the example of a rat that's in a maze and you lift the barrier so that the rat can run into the maze. So that's the cue. And then the routine is that the rat runs around the maze trying to find this piece of chocolate, which is the reward. The scientist did this over and over and over again, trying to figure out, is this rat going to learn, and is there going to be a routine that's created to get to the reward faster? So they did this test several times. There didn't seem to be any improvement, and they kind of were thinking initially, oh, I guess the rat isn't really learning or developing any sort of an automatic routine. However, they then looked at the brain activity that was going on in the rat as he went throughout the maze, and they realized that there is a ton of brain activity going on, and every obstacle that the rat came into, or wall that he sniffed, or air that he sniffed, things like that, he was processing all of that information and using it in his brain. I mean, you could see the brain activity was heightened during that time. And then eventually the rat did figure out, okay, if I go straight and then to the left, that's where the chocolate is. And so eventually the rat got a lot better at that. And then the other interesting piece was that once the rat had identified that pattern and it had become a routine, the brain activity during the search for the chocolate actually went down quite a bit. And so you see that as we create a routine and as it becomes automatic for us, our brain has to think less and less about that activity. So think about when you learn to drive, and initially it was very challenging. It took a lot of effort. Your brain really had to work hard at remembering all of the different things about driving. But then eventually it became automatic where you don't have to think about it so much, and you can back out of your driveway no problem without having to really think about, okay, which pedal should I use? Which mirror should I look in? Is there anybody coming? How fast should I be driving? All of those little details become so automatic. So our brain activity when we're driving now is way less than it used to be. When my mom taught me to drive on the highway, I could not, for the life of me, look at the signs on the highways to see when my exit was coming up. I was so focused on driving, and I couldn't see the signs, and so I would constantly miss my exit. And she would laugh so hard at me, and I would feel so frustrated because I would have missed the exit and we're gonna be late. But she, rightfully so, really needed me to learn it so that I would automate that and I would be able to do all the things at once. And so eventually, of course, now I'm able to see my exits, although I don't have a great sense of direction. So that might still be a problem for me. But point being, when you automate things, you have to think about them less. So in thinking about routine before starting something as challenging as law school or continuing with law school, you want to develop those routines beforehand so that you're not having to use energy while you're also trying to do law school in creating those routines and building those habits. So the next piece of the science is how to change a habit or create a habit. So the first thing that the author talks about is creating a craving. So when I was referencing Cinnabon earlier, that's an example of marketers that are smart, that have the smell of cinnamon and pastries wafting throughout the mall because it prompts us to say, oh my gosh, I want a Cinnabon, and you're already holding your wallet and you didn't even realize that you reached inside your bag. That's how strong those cravings can be. So the example that the author uses to describe this part is the Pepsodent toothpaste commercials that basically told people, hey, you feel that film on your teeth? Pepsodent can help with that. And so it prompted people to start feeling their teeth, which is such a weird concept. But now I feel like you always know and you're like, ooh, I kind of need to brush my teeth. And I guess before this commercial or before this ad campaign, it was more of you brush your teeth to prevent decay and to prevent cavities, things like that. It wasn't really focused on the feeling of having clean teeth. And so they got the public to start feeling their teeth and thinking, oh, it's time to brush my teeth. And then they created this habit cycle where you feel that your teeth are fuzzy or kind of have a film on them. You begin your routine of brushing your teeth, and then the reward is that you can slide your tongue over your teeth and it's all nice and smooth, and that's such a great feeling. So they created that and watched their demand explode for this toothpaste company, which just seems like such a random thing. But if you think about it, I mean, we all get to a point in the day where we're like, ooh, I want to brush my teeth again. And that's a great example of that craving, the routine, and then the reward. The basic psychology can be drawn down to these two basic rules. Find a simple and obvious cue, and then second, clearly define the rewards. If you want to introduce a new routine into your life, you need to do those two things. So create a clear and obvious cue, and then clearly define the reward. So if you want to start running every morning, you need to make sure that you have your shoes and your workout gear right by your bed ready to go, and that is your first thing you see in the morning when you wake up. And then you want to really identify what the reward is. So what are you getting out of that? Is it because you like the results for the way that your energy feels, or that you like the endorphin rush? Do you then feel like you can hit the ground running at work? What is the reward? And really define that for yourself, and that will help you to create that habit cycle. Think about when your phone dings, you immediately pick up your phone and check it because you're used to that immediate gratification. But if you turn off your ringer or put your phone in the other room, it's amazing how long you can actually operate without ever picking up your phone and looking at it. But when we have the cue of it's sitting right there, or it's lighting up in the dark, or it's vibrating, whatever, that cue and that craving are initiated, and then your routine starts, and then you get your reward, and it cycles back around again. So if you remove the cue or the craving, then you will stop the cycle. So if there's a habit that you have, such as checking your phone too much, or any other habit that you'd like to reduce or remove, there are tactics that you can use to not easily, but with some effort, really make progress on that. There's sort of like a golden rule that the author talks about with almost any behavior can be transformed if the cue and the reward stay the same. So the example given in the book is a woman who bites her nails all the time. And so the therapist that's working with her asks her to make a check mark on an index card every time that she has the urge to bite her nails. And she realizes that it's basically because she's bored. And then she has this kind of feeling of accomplishment afterwards where she feels like it's a sense of accomplishment once she's done biting her nails. And so the therapist encourages her to, every time she wants to do that, stop the routine by putting her hands like under her legs or in her pockets, somewhere where she can't access her nails at all. And then similarly, find another physical action that can give her that kind of sense of accomplishment or finality. He asks her to replace the behavior by patting on her leg several times or something else that will kind of prompt that reward response from her body. And of course, it's talking about this in this book, so of course it works for her and she doesn't bite her nails anymore and she's able to go get manicures and all of that. But it was just a simple cycle of a cue where she was bored, and so it prompted her to want to bite her nails. She would do that as the routine, and then the reward was that physical response from her body. If you can break that cycle and maybe the cue is still there, but that routine changes and the thing that you do that gives you the same reward changes, then you're able to, in a matter of weeks, really change your routine completely. So try that out on something this week that you want to maybe make a shift. If you want to journal every night, make sure that you set your journal right by your bedside table, and then you'll see it. And so it will initiate that cue. Or if you want to maybe stop biting your nails or doing something like that is kind of a negative habit, replace what that routine is, but try to keep the cue and the reward the same. Let me know how that goes. Next, I want to talk a little bit about to-do lists, because that goes hand in hand with routine, habit, and sort of building your productivity up so that you can be the most effective and efficient version of yourself. So I did some research on why making to-do lists is so satisfying for us and why I personally really love to-do lists. And basically what I found is that it frees up our brains to focus on other things. So you can kind of almost consider it done or consider it partway done. Once you've got it on a list, you can put it out of your mind. And we find sometimes when you have trouble sleeping at night, if you make a list of all the things that are buzzing through your mind or that you're feeling pressure that you need to do the next morning, if you make a list of those things, it helps you to kind of ease your mind and allow it to be written down, and it's there and you need to do it, but it's not so present on your mind. So essentially, when we put it on a to-do list, we consider it done. We're also creating a roadmap for reaching that goal or accomplishing that task, because we're saying doing this in the morning at this time. So it's important on to-do lists to not just put mom if you need to call mom on Tuesday morning, right? So you want to make it specific enough to where you know in your mind that you've got a plan for that task. So it makes us more likely to focus better on the areas of our life or work that we're doing right now, instead of focusing so much on the things that are coming up. It's sort of like a brain dump, if you've ever done that, where you go through your mind and think through, okay, what am I stressing about right now? What is on my mind? And you just write everything down. It helps you to kind of dump everything out and get clarity in your mind of, okay, these are the things that need to be accomplished. You can then organize them into categories, or even just toss it away, because it's the act of getting it out on paper and out of your brain. Also, some of the research showed that putting a to-do list, even writing things down that you've already accomplished, is really helpful because it's proof of what we've achieved that day. Sometimes I get to the end of the day and I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I even do today? But then if I look back at my to-do list, I realize how much I've actually accomplished and how productive I was, even though it felt like I was kind of flitting from one thing to the next. It's definitely, it reduces my anxiety, because I feel, okay, I'm actually getting some things done, even though I feel a little bit haphazard. I don't know. Does anyone else feel that way? writing to-do lists can also help the struggle of tackling larger tasks or large goals. If you can break those bigger goals down into smaller, more manageable tasks, then you're actually more likely to accomplish those goals, because saying, I'm going to write this book feels like a really daunting task. But if you say, I'm going to write the outline of chapter 4 tomorrow, it's a little bit more manageable and it's something you can check off right away once you've completed it. So it helps with tackling larger goals and giving a structure or a plan to stick to. It's also helpful to label each task with how long you think it will take to complete it. You don't have to do that, but it helps, because if you know that something is a 30-minute task and you've got just 30 minutes before lunch, then you can kind of motivate yourself and say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take 30 minutes to spend the time to get this thing done. And it keeps you to that time limit, so you don't spend an hour on it, especially when you are really tight on time. It's good to identify how long you think something should take and then pretty much stick to it. In my experience, I have found that tasks sort of expand to fill whatever amount of space you have allotted for them. So if you say, I'm going to clean the house today and I'll get it done at some point today, then you will probably take all day to get it done. Versus if you say, I'm going to do it this morning and I only have 2 hours to do it, you'll probably get the same amount done with not really a reduced amount of quality, but you have allotted a space, and so that task won't fill up a longer space than that. Another element is postponing tasks that you don't really like doing or don't want to do, and you kind of view your to-do list like a menu at a restaurant where you're like, what do I want to do now, instead of using time blocking or specifying on your to-do list when you're going to do those things. There's a Mark Twain quote that I love that says, the secret to getting ahead is getting started. And I always think that we work ourselves up so much about these to-do list items, and then it takes 4 minutes to complete a task. And you're just thinking to yourself, why didn't I do this yesterday? Or 6 months ago, whenever I was first thinking about doing it. So don't treat your to-do list like a menu. Specify when you're going to do those things. I put it right on my Google Calendar as a task, so that I know that that is what I'm going to do at that time, and it pops up on my phone, so it keeps me on schedule. That's the way that I have figured out to best utilize my to-do list and my calendars. So tying this back into the routine thing, using to-do lists really makes sense for things that are new or difficult tasks. It doesn't really make sense to use automatic things or things that are routine for you. Like, you don't want to brush your teeth on your to-do list every day, unless that's something that you maybe forget to do. You don't want to put things that you do every day easily. You want to do things that you're trying to remember to do, or that you're trying to train yourself to do. And you want to convert as many of those as you can to automatic behaviors, so that you are spending less effort thinking about them and doing them. Some days it may be a challenge to do that, and other days it may feel a little bit more like routine. But the key is consistency with that and just maintaining that routine. And if you get off of it for a little while, then just add it back to that to-do list. Kind of reward yourself for doing it again. Remind yourself of that cue, routine, reward cycle and process, so that you can get back on track with it. And I think the more you can get away from it being effortful and more towards automatic, the less brain power you're going to have to use, and the less energy you're going to have to expend in doing something that is really good for you. So that is all for this week's episode. Again, the book that I've been talking about is called The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business by Charles Duhigg. It's linked on my website, legaltini.com. So if you're interested in purchasing it, then you can check it out there. I would love to hear from you if there's anything in particular that you would like for me to podcast about. I would also love to know how you're enjoying these, and if there's any routines or habits that you are working on right now that this has been helpful with, or if there's any questions at all that you have for me. I would love to answer those questions in a future podcast, so definitely send me a message. Be sure to check out my Instagram account, which is at legalteeny_podcast, and check out my website, which is legalteeny.com. I've got a shop on there. You can also listen to episodes on there, and there's an About Me section. So if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about who I am, then that is where you should go. Thanks so much for listening. This is Legaltini, your very own sip of law school.